Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good
Glad to see everybody here. Proof that Passover is actually over. So we left off in the middle of Unit 8 in this discussion about the dispute between the Hasidim and Nagdim. And we've looked at a number of Hasidic teachings. It's probably a good idea for us to see the dispute from another viewpoint. And so here we have some information, really biographical information about the Vilna Gaon, who really was the leader of the opposition, maybe more the figurehead leader, because he didn't engage too much in political machinations, but certainly he expressed the ideal of the Misnagdim. And so what do we know about him? Well, here's this book that was the first book written about him. And it says, all his virtues were the consequence of his diligence. He took upon himself never to sleep more than 2 hours in a single day. Okay? Now, that might not be true, okay? But, they don't say that kind of thing about most of us, right? Right? They only say that sort of thing about people like the Vilna Gaon, right? He never walked 4 cubits without a book of Torah and Tefillin, never engaged in idle conversation, right? So as an illustration, if one of his sons came to visit him from out of town, he would greatly rejoice, not having seen him for a year or two, but he would not ask him about his material welfare. And after he rested from his journey for an hour, the father would hasten him to return to his studies and would say, on the road, you didn't have a chance to study. You'll make it up while you're here. How great is the spiritual delight and sweetness of the God-fearing, who leave the ways of this world and its affairs to labor in the study of Torah and mitzvot. There did not arise like him in his Torah, in his numerous compositions on various aspects of the Torah. He composed more than 70 volumes. Okay? So here's the picture of someone who is totally devoted to the study of Torah, to the teaching of Torah, to writing of Torah. And we don't see a lot about relationships.
I've
We
just
don't
lost
see a
the
lot
whole
about
thing.
social skills.
I don't know how to do it, Jerry.
The other one.
Right.
I lost the whole
So
thing.
any comments on this? Any observation?
I clicked on it 100.
Yeah. So why do you think the Vilna Gaon attributed so much importance to studying Torah?
Well, I think that's just the culture it came from.
I'm sorry, Lou?
It's the culture he came from.
It's the culture he came from. okay, which prized Torah learning and not necessarily a warm relationship with the average Jew. Yes, Daniel.
Quick question of clarification on my part. I'm sorry. So the Vilna Gaon was in the Hasidic movement, or he was
No,
opposed to it?
just the opposite. He's really the spiritual leader of the Misnagdim.
Okay, so the culture that he came is being threatened, is in some way what he's doing in response to the Hasidic movement, or would he have been doing this whether the Hasid were there?
Well, he would certainly have been doing this anyway, but he expresses an ideal that he wants other people to follow as well. And the Hasidic change of emphasis is a threat to this path.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other comments or questions here? What were the benefits of this position, of his devotion to study? Yes, Karen.
I guess, the relationship with God would be paramount in to him, and so then, if you study, the more I study Torah, and I enjoy it when I do it, and I do find I learn a lot, I can see where if you did it all the time, I guess like any activity that you find pleasure and spiritual joy in, or education, that you would want to do more of it, and perhaps that just continues to increase your closeness to God. And if that's the most important relationship in your life, then maybe it's kind of a no-brainer that you just want to keep doing it, and nothing else would come close to that.
Yes. Now, if you are looking at this from the Hasidic point of view, how would you critique that?
Well, it seems like you exclude, to me, the downside of it is you could be excluding a lot of other important relationships in your life, and losing out on those important aspects of life.
Yes.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, that's a piece that I think is a piece of the answer. Yes, Lou.
I think that the Vilna Gaon may have been focused on his individual relationship with God, and not properly expanding the relationship of God to the rest of the people.
Yes, and that is precisely the role of the tzaddik in Hasidism. The tzaddik can't just hold on to God. He also has to raise up other people in their relationship with God. Yes, Lou.
I have a question about Yeshua Heschel Levine, who wrote this piece. He lived after the Vilna Gaon died, so it's not a contemporary writing to the Vilna Gaon's life. It's afterwards, and I'm wondering what the purpose was.
Well, I think he probably overlapped some with the Vilna Gaon. He understood that this person was the ideal for a generation within a particular point of view, and so this is let's show everybody exactly what he represented and how he represented it. Now, it may have been a little bit overpraise. It probably wasn't the most unbiased biography. It's what we refer to as hagiography, meaning not very objective biography. But nonetheless, it's useful in that probably most of what he says about the Vilna Gaon is at least rooted in truth. Whether he actually slept no more than 2 hours a day, I kind of wonder about that. But maybe. He was a Torah athlete, we would say. Okay, other questions or comments before we move ahead? The next text is from one of the Baal Shem Tov's most outspoken disciples, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoya. Okay? And this is kind of a response to the Misnagdim. Okay? And what does he have to say? He says the purpose of the entire Torah and the mitzvot, the reason they were given, is in order that one can have the privilege of attaching oneself to God. May he be blessed, as is written, to him shall you hold fast. Right? So here's the power of the notion of devekut, cleaving to God. Right? And for Yaakov Yosef, that's the whole thing. It's devekut, cleaving to God. But with the passage of the years, hearts have grown smaller and people fail to understand this matter. Instead, they make the Torah into a crown with which to aggrandize themselves and to glorify themselves. When one learns a single law, one glorifies oneself a bit. When one learns more, one glorifies oneself more. Behold the Talmudic scholars who break their footsteps going from city to study Talmud. And this explains the verse from Isaiah, why do you break and stray even further? The more they break their footsteps to go to a yeshiva to study, the more they stray and distance themselves from God. In other words, all of this Torah study doesn't necessarily attach you to God. It's prayer and meditation and, constant self-awareness that bring one into devekut. And so that's, that's a very different image. It's a very different ideal from what you see expressed in the Vilna Gaon and the camp of the Misnagdim. Okay? Questions or comments here? Yes, Lou.
It seems that this is very much antithetical to Torah study in yeshivot. And at some point over the next couple of centuries, there was a bit of a merger of philosophy, I think, between the Mitnagim and the Hasidim. But at the time, it looked like they were definitely going different ways, like Democrats and Republicans today.
Yeah, they came to an accommodation in the 19th century, and especially near the end of the 19th century. And I think there were two reasons for that. One was that by that time, Hasidism had become an established path, and no one really could talk about doing away with it or putting them in cherem, excommunicating Hasidic camps. It just wasn't going to happen. And the other reason was common enemy. They felt that they needed to unite against the trends toward modernization. That just, there were bigger fish to fry than worrying about the Hasidim or the Misnagdim, who were just, they were faithful Jews, just had a slightly different view of Judaism. But, the modernizers, they were a very big threat as far as both camps were concerned. So that's why you ultimately see this dispute dissipate by the late 19th century. Okay. Other questions or comments here? Yes, Karen.
So is this saying that at the end when he says the last sentence,
Mm-hmm.
the more you break, the more you straight, or is the point that because you're trying to just glorify yourself by being such a smart student that you missed the point of, as you said, the thoughtfulness about the relationship and those kind of things? Is that why you're missing it? Or
It's that, and the fact that you isolate yourself from the community. Now, one has to understand that Hasidim were not opposed to Torah study. They saw Torah study as one means to an end. What they felt was that the Misnagdim were making Torah study into the end, into the main goal, rather than relationship with God, intense devekut, cleaving to God. There is the dispute.
okay.
Okay.
I have a question.
Other questions or comments?
I do, but you can't see me. Rabbi,
But I hear you, Ronnie. Yes. Someone had a comment or a question? Ronnie, you are muted. Okay. Let's go on to number 9. Okay. This is from Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who was the first Chabad Rebbe. Most of us live in the shadow of the 7th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson. Shneir Zalman was the one who got it all started. And Shneir Zalman, although he was definitely a Hasidic leader, he was a little more sympathetic and polite towards the Misnagdim. And so he's trying to take a more moderate position, a more in-between position. And here is what he says. Right? While I don't know you and have never seen you, I have heard about you, that the Spirit of the Lord moves you and that you did not join the laughers and mockers of those who wish to serve the Lord truly with service of the heart, that is, prayer. Their hands are uplifted with regard to Torah study and acts of kindness, and I truly wish this for them forever. Right? So he has words of praise for the Misnagdim. But they transgressed teachings and violated laws by gathering together to issue a decree banning prayer different from their own that one should pray in haste without any movement or raising of the voice. Okay? So, his problem with the Misnagdim is not with what they do, but with the fact that they attacked the Hasidic movement. Right? And he continues, those who say that prayer is merely a rabbinic commandment, is not from the written Torah, have never seen light. For while the wording of the liturgy and its recitation 3 times a day are indeed rabbinic commandments, the matter of prayer is the foundation of the entire Torah, namely to know God, to recognize his greatness and splendor, to love God, to attach oneself to him and to his Torah, and to desire his commandments. In other words, it's all about dveikud. That's the goal. And this objective is achieved in our times through the recitation of the morning Psalms, the Shema, the blessings before and after it, out loud, and with a voice that arouses intention of the heart. Anyone close to God who has tasted the flavor of prayer a single time will understand that without it, you cannot even begin to serve God truly. Instead, your service will be mitzvat anashim melumada, one of my favorite biblical phrases, a commandment of human beings learned by rote. Okay? So, Schneier Zalman's tone towards the Misnagdim is a little different from what we saw, for instance, in Yaakov Yosef of Polanoia. And he doesn't attack the motivations or the sincerity or the piety of the Misnagdim, but he says prayer and not Torah study is the foundation of Judaism. Now, maybe at this point, we should look at this question. Which is more important, prayer or Torah study? Anybody want to offer an opinion on that? Steve?
I would just say that I think when it comes to Chabad today, there's a 2-track approach. For those who are non-observant, they will go out and do observant parts, put the fill-in on, do prayer. But internally, when they're training their own people, including my daughter, they don't start with prayer. They start with the understanding. And prayer is, if you go to shul, especially for women, but going to shul is not nearly as important as understanding the basics. Basically, you should learn that leads you to prayer, not prayer leading you to more understanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, my question, Steve, is not so much about Chabad today. I'm asking what you think.
I think without the understanding, I would say that to some extent, the proof is in the pudding. When you look at what's happening with non-Orthodox Judaism today, going to services can only lead to so much. If you don't have understanding, if you don't know motivation about why we're praying or about some of the other values of Judaism, it's not going to last very long just trying to show up and show and pray.
Yes, and I would add to this, by the way, Chabad is more cued into Torah study historically, has been more cued into Torah study and what you refer to as understanding mitzvot than other Hasidic groups. Okay? It's a much more intellectual brand of Judaism than other Hasidic groups. Yes, Daniel.
For me, to be brutally honest, my Jewish identity is way more tied with study. And when I say study, I mean what we're doing right now, than it is going to a prayer service. I rarely reach any kind of mental state of excitement during prayer, but I do. What we're studying right now is making me think a lot more about what being Jewish is than, listening to, a cantor singing the Amida, the first 3 pages of the Amida.
Mhm. Yeah. So for you, prayer is not the foundation. Yeah. So, my own suspicion is that this just reflects different personalities. There are some people who, if they don't emotionally connect through prayer, they're not going to gain that intellectual piece, what Steve refers to as the understanding of the mitzvot. Other folks, yes, Lou.
I think it is best exemplified by a balance between the two and beyond the two. It's what you do with the prayer and what you do with learning of Torah, not just learning it for yourself.
Yes, yes. So I think that there are a lot of folks for whom classes like this, classes like the Melton program, locally sponsored through the Jewish Community Center, those feed the people who want very much to build this intellectual connection. Right? And one of the challenges we have is, how do you bridge to a fuller Judaism from one side or the other? I think that, being a synagogue-based study program, we at least, definitely have the goal of bridging to a broader Judaism, a more, all-inclusive Judaism that isn't just Torah learning, but also brings people to focus on prayer and on a connection with God and broader observance, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Hopefully those who are, primarily connected through prayer are led through that to a broader understanding of Judaism. Let's go to number 10, and we will switch back to the other side, right? The side of the Misnagdim. This piece is from Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who was the leader of the Misnagdim after the death of the Vilna Gaon. Right? So he is going to give us a strong defense of Torah study as the center of Judaism and not Dveikut. And what does he say? A person's, we'll skip through parts of this because this is a very lengthy piece. A person's worshiping God with a pure heart can lead him to arrogance. He will look down at someone who does not pray with pure thoughts, who keeps all the commandments written in God's Torah, but without Dveikut. All the more so, if such a person sees someone studying Torah and thinks that he is not learning for its own sake, he will sneer at him. And that attitude is a grave sin, right? For anyone who performs mitzvot, even without Dveikut, is called a servant of God and is beloved by him, right? So even if you do a mitzvah without necessarily having, the proper intention in mind, even if one says the words of prayer without a full attachment to God through that, still, it's a mitzvah. It's important. And such a person is beloved by God. Even if you study Torah not for one's own, for its own sake, even though he has not reached the highest level, should not be disdained. Every Jew should show him respect. Even someone whose Torah study is for some ulterior motive will be rewarded by God as long as it is not done for the sake of strife. All right? He gets, this reward, the study of Torah is precious in the eyes of God, more so than all the commandments, even if all the others had been performed for their own sake. Why? Because, as we say, the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the study of Torah, is equivalent to all the mitzvot. So don't let the Yetzer Hara tell you that the main thing is to occupy yourself with purifying your thoughts, that all this other stuff without Dveikud is worthless. Okay? Because if you do that, you will end up considering it permitted to disregard the time of a prayer or mitzvah, as the Hasidim, by the way, would occasionally do. Okay? To them, you had to sort of work up to a certain state of kavanah, of intention, of dveikut, of cleaving, for your prayer to be worthwhile. Okay? And Rabbi Chaim says, this is no different than someone blowing the shofar with profound devotion on the first night of Passover instead of eating the prescribed amount of matzah, right? It's doing the right thing at the wrong time is wrong, right? Then what will be with the Torah? The essential part of every mitzvah is its performance. Purity of thought adds to the performance. It enhances the mitzvah, but it is not an indispensable condition. Okay? And anyone who increases his stringent performance of mitzvot, harezeh meshubach, that is praiseworthy, that is good. But the big thing is that you do the mitzvot and that you study Torah on a constant basis. Okay? So this is, a whole different attitude from that of Schneur Zalman or Yaakov Yosef. Purity of intention here, not so important. So let me throw out the question. Do you agree with this view that performance is more important than intention? Anyone have an opinion on that? Yes, Lou.
They're both important. It's like Maimonides' hierarchy of tzedakah. Even if you do it because somebody nudges you to do it, it's a good thing, but maybe not as good as doing it on your own or doing it anonymously for the community.
Yeah, but the tzedakah needs to get done. Yes, Steve.
Just one quick thing. The argument of people who dive in so quickly without any kavanah just because they're trying to check off the box. So the question is, what does that really do?
Yeah. So maybe there comes a point, and maybe even Rabbi Chaim would agree that there's a point where doing the mitzvah really doesn't do the mitzvah. Yeah. Ronnie, did you have a comment? Yeah, unmute, Ronnie.
I want to go back. I'm sorry, we're having a lot of problems getting into it. I want to go back on what Daniel said previously, and I agree with him. I think too many people go to services and it's very rote. There's no feeling behind it. They just go through the service because they know the words, they know the order, but there's no connection to God through that kind of prayer. So I'm agreeing with Daniel. I get a lot more out of these classes where I hopefully am learning than going to services and saying the prayers. Because, you know, my mind starts to wander and I'm thinking, oh, where I need at the grocery store. But you know the prayers by heart, and therefore you continue to say them, but without feeling.
Uh-huh. At the same time, you know, I think that Rabbi Chaim would also agree that prayer with, you know, prayer is important, and prayer with kavanah is the right kind of
Right.
prayer. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Karen and then Steve.
I was just thinking that sometimes just being with the community, if you go to pray at synagogue, that in and of itself can stimulate your desire to study or, you know, be more connected to God or Judaism, just because you value that connection now and the history of the Jewish people. I was also thinking about how I've started leading services frequently in the museum minyan, and the level of connection I feel is much higher when I'm doing that versus if I'm sitting and kind of passively listening or kind of a spectator. So that's interesting too. But I also agree with Daniel that the study really takes me to a very different place. It's sort of left brain, right brain. I learn a lot, and that stimulates me to want to learn more. And so it's hard to pick just one, but there's something about the community, and whether that's studying as a group or praying as a group, that adds a lot.
Yeah. So whatever works for you, whatever brings you to, you know, greater learning, greater understanding, that's something you know, I'm sure that both sides could agree upon. Yeah, Steve, and then Daniel.
For me, there's a direct connection. There's certain parts of the service that for me are enhanced because I actually remember where I learned something that enhances that part of the service, including even you, Rabbi Daniel. Some parts that I've learned from you that you enter into my daily service when I'm praying certain parts, certain prayers, or whatever. So I think there's a connection also between us, a direct connection.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve, and I tell you the same thing is true for me. There were sessions where I learned about a certain prayer, or even how to do a certain prayer, what to think about during that prayer. And I might have heard it 50 years ago, and it still informs my practice. Yes, Daniel.
So when we ask the question, is it more important to pray with or without kavanah, as it is compared to doing mitzvot with or without understanding, are we asking is what is more important for the individual's feelings or the community's benefit or for the sake of God? What is the measurement that we're looking for what is important on both sides of this question?
I think it depends on which of those you want to focus on. I mean, you know, if I would try to objectify that, I would say it's, you know, what is it that God wants me to do? Right? Obviously, God wants me to do the mitzvot in the best possible way, recognizing that I'm an imperfect person. And I'm not always going to do it, and I'm not always going to do it in the right frame. But I have to be committed to a certain path. And it's that commitment that spurs me on and keeps me, working at that.
Well, does God care whether or not I'm having fun doing study versus prayer? I mean, we're all talking, and I'm the one who started it. We're all talking about how this makes us feel, and I'm not so sure that's the role.
So looking at God the way the prophets look at God, I would say, yes, God cares about what you do and how you think and the way you're going to live your life. And how a certain spiritual path is going to move you along in a certain direction. And yes, the intellectual component may be the highlight for you, but it also can be a means to an end to further the more spiritual side, where, if you didn't have the intellectual push, you wouldn't focus on that at all. Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay. So I think we've gotten a pretty good view into the dispute between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. I think we understand how this plays out in our own lives and in Judaism, in, let's say, non-Orthodox synagogues, and which is the path that moves us individually and collectively. And that each of us has to answer for ourselves. We're going to start a new unit today.
Rabbi, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Please, go ahead.
All right, this is not I don't mean this to sound as facetious as it may. I'm watching Shtisel, okay?
Yes.
The third season.
Yes.
Is the Judaism that they're practicing on it seems to me that they do a lot of singing and dancing and they're Hasidim, but also they're all sitting around studying very obscure parts of the Talmud and having passionate arguments about what the law says. It seems to me like, for lack of a better term, Black Hat Judaism is both. I don't know of anybody that I would call extremely Orthodox that seems to be veering either way. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yes, I would say that today, while the two camps are much closer, the emphasis on different sides still persists. By the way, how many of you in this class are watching Shtisel or saw the first couple of seasons? All right, so most of you. All right.
Season 3 is on Netflix, by the way.
Yes, we are currently watching season 3.
It just blows me away.
And yeah, it's taking on some very, very big issues that are important, inside and outside the Orthodox community. We are, it's not always to enjoy, but it's fascinating. That said, it doesn't give, and I don't think it claims to give, a comprehensive view of this dispute within Judaism. But you do see strong, let's say, Yosela Weiss, the yeshiva bocher, is spending all of his time in Torah study. And yet there's also some emphasis on celebration and joy, right? It doesn't strike me as part of the Hasidic camp, but it has elements of that, right? I think that's true for most of the characters in Shtisel. Akiva is more attuned, you can call it the artistic side coming out in him, but he's more attuned to the inner stuff than the intellectual stuff. And so that's part of the challenge for him personally. Part of the challenge for all of us. Right? We may not do it as, as part of a community with that kind of intensity, but we're still striving to learn and looking for the kind of spirituality that nourishes us. Okay, it is time to begin Unit 9, which focuses on Jewish continuity and the mitzvah of procreation, to be fruitful and multiply. So Jennifer, I believe you have the introductory video lined up for us. And here it is.
In the 1960s and 70s, the Israeli government struggled with a fundamental tension as they attempted to increase the Jewish population in Israel. On the heels of two major wars, they wanted more soldiers in the army. And recognizing a looming demographic threat from the Palestinians, they were desperate to maintain a Jewish majority. At the same time, the country was still rather poor, and those Jews with the highest birth rates were among the poorest and least assimilated. Lawmakers who advocated for increasing the Jewish birth rate also struggled with the financial risks of doing so, meaning the state would have to support the families financially. Additionally, lawmakers worried about the mental and physical health of children living in poverty and ultimately threatening the quality of soldiers in the army. The debate came to a head in the Knesset in the mid-1970s as they discussed legalizing abortion. The question centered on one clause in the proposed law, the socioeconomic clause, which would have allowed abortion for socioeconomic reasons, like already having a big family. A few politicians zeroed in on the quality versus quantity tension in this discussion. Chaviv Shmaoni, a member of the Labor Party, stated, "It's doubtful that society desires children whose births are not even wanted by their parents. Families with many children are blessed by those children only if the families have the financial and emotional ability to raise them and educate them." Here, Shmaoni drew on a common phrase in Hebrew, mishpacha bruchat yeladim, a family blessed with children, to refer to families with many children. But he clarified that these children are not a blessing unless their parents have the means to support them and raise them well. In other words, he believed those children add value to the family and to society only if the family can afford them. Member of Knesset Oren Amir expressed concern for a woman's quality of life when she's had so many children. Referencing Haredi ultra-Orthodox women, she said, "Already, many women are constantly pregnant. Women who at the age of 27, 28, 29 are mothers to 8, 9, or 10 children. These women are exhausted, sad, have no energy, no money, and are sick. The responsibility to care for the children and educate them falls on their shoulders." Taking aim at religious families, Namir asked, "Does this preserve a family's holiness, a person's holiness? What isn't good for the person, and the mother's also a person, and what isn't good for the family won't be good for the army or the nation either. And permit me, the secular woman, to say it also won't be good for the religion." The tension in the abortion debate in Israel in the 1970s reveals how Israeli lawmakers struggled with wanting to increase the quantity of Jewish children without threatening the quality of a woman's life, a family, the army, the country, and Judaism itself. Reading and discussing biblical and rabbinic texts, and more recent data from social scientific studies, you will see how the discussion over the permissibility and use of contraception in Jewish communities demonstrates the various forms this debate over quality and quantity in Jewish procreation has taken. When we think about Jewish reproductive values, we often prioritize the pro-natalist elements. Pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply, the first commandment God gives to Adam and Eve in Sefer Bereshit, is often touted as one of the most important commandments. Our holidays, like Passover, are centered around teaching our children. Many Jewish communities in the United States offer financial support for Jewish education. Synagogues are expanding their family programming and working to make services more child-friendly. And when we think about the discourse surrounding intermarriage, we see that many people focus on the question of children who result from that union. How can we make sure those children are part of a Jewish community? This is not an issue unique to America, as we've already seen that Israel is similarly preoccupied with the question of Jewish continuity through reproduction. Israel's many reproductive policies encourage reproduction among Jews, whether it's through parental leave policies or covering the cost of fertility treatments. To be sure, Jewish communities encourage reproduction. But as you read the sources about contraception, you'll see that there's an equally strong consideration for a parent's quality of life and for the quality of life of resulting children. What makes this conversation so interesting is that the terms and definitions are constantly shifting depending on context. For some people, quality is determined by one's own professional successes, and this is often in tension with increasing one's family size. For others, the quality of one's life is enhanced by increasing the quantity of one's children. The sources demonstrate both legalistic ways that contraception has been understood to function in Jewish family life and how Jewish families of the 20th and 21st centuries have engaged with this tension between quality and quantity in questions of procreation. This discussion is particularly important today as concerns about low reproductive rates among Jews in America proliferate, leaving many Jews without children, whether by choice or due to infertility, to feel ostracized from the Jewish community. Those who struggle with fertility issues often don't have the opportunity to decide between quality of life or quantity of children. We need to understand the many sides to this debate and develop new approaches to reconciling the tension. One possible outcome is that Jewish organizations concerned about demographics in the Jewish community can gain a more robust understanding of how Jewish families struggle to balance these competing values and therefore do more to support Jewish families, whatever their size.
Okay. Observations, comments? I'll share just one quick thing, and that is that the latest studies of population growth throughout the world indicate that Israel does have, even adjusting for the high birth rates in Haredi communities, Israel has a well above average birth rate, over 3 children per family, and that's strikingly above most Western countries where we tend to struggle to get anywhere close to 2 children per family. Yes, Steve.
I don't think there's anything new about this. And I question how much is unique about Judaism, like you mentioned, versus the world at large, that we're subject to the same trends. And I agree, a lot of the increase in Israel has been the Russians, the second generation of Russian Aliyah, who became who are mostly secular.
I'm sure that's been a big factor. Right? Other comments? Yeah, yes, Marcia. Unmute yourself, Marcia.
Yeah, I was thinking also, not just in terms of the size of Jewish couples who marry and whether they have small or large families, but also the rate of marriage between Jews and non-Jews. And so with that increasingly happening more and more, that the number of Jewish children resulting from those marriages will certainly decrease because of the rate of intermarriage.
Yeah, definitely a big factor here.
And I just found out from my daughter-in-law that my grandson is marrying someone who's not Jewish, and she has no intention of converting, and I kind of feel bad. I mean, their children won't be, whatever children they have will not be Jewish. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's a big problem today.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. And it's something that everyone in Jewish life, in Jewish education, in the rabbinate, everyone is wrestling with in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, we have tended to think of Judaism as a religion where procreation is one of the highest values. We're going to see from the texts in this unit that Judaism also upholds some other values which sometimes come into conflict with reproduction. And we'll see some halachic discussion about contraception, where we balance the issues that Dr. Alsher was talking about, the value of sheer numbers and procreation versus the values of health and education and financial security. All of that we will come to next week. So thank you all very much. Those of you with our second class will be starting in about 4 minutes. Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Happy anniversary to Jennifer also.
Amen.
Thank you.
Yeah.